Well, hello, Tri-State. Just to let you know a little bit of what I have to put up with my co-workers here. Our dear friend Tim Lester is not with us today. He has strep, so he's not feeling so great. So he is not with us today. He was to do announcements this morning and so on. So realizing he's not coming, I send a text message to Chris and say, I nominate you as announcement boy for the day. To which he texted back, I receive the nomination with joy and state that it is my intent to make announcements great again. So, all right. So we trust that he has made announcements great again. Okay. But today we continue, as Chris has said, with the second of 6 studies in our sermon series that we call Drift. You know, sitting on a raft or in an inner tube in a lazy body of water with very slow movement of that water. It may not seem like one is moving much whatsoever, but after a time, without kind of having fixed an identified point of reference on the shore, one might find himself to have quietly and unnoticeably drifted rather far away from the beginning point, without diligence and an intentional commitment to remain focused on that stable point of reference. In fact, this can happen to us, spiritually speaking. Imperceptibly, weeks can go by without the disciplines that are concomitant with the Christian life and prayerful dependence upon God. And before long, one realizes that they're adrift and not as close to the solid ground of fellowship with Christ that is that which sustains us through, of course, the difficult seasons of life. And a time when this can especially happen is a time of life when you are out of your life rhythms and the ebb and flow of life, sort of like the summer months. And for example, a favorite summer activity for many families, like my own, when I was growing up in New Jersey, is to do what we call in Jersey, we're going to go down the shore, we'd say. We're going to go down the shore. How about you, huh? Okay, so we go to the shore, and we would play in the water, and by the way, I noticed that like a lot of our people are down the shore right now, but you know what it's like when you're playing in the water and you're in the surf and you're riding the waves in, you're running back out, and you're in and out of the water. You know what kind of happens over time. And I remember this as a child. I remember getting yelled at about this as a child, and then I remember growing up and being a parent and yelling at my children about the very same things. The wave comes in, you run back out. The wave comes in, you run back out. It comes in, and the next thing you know, you're just kind of going down the shoreline. And after a while, you look up and you realize that you're nowhere near where the starting point was on the beach. And I would tell my children about this. I'm saying, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to watch you. Now you got to every so often you got to look up, and you got to see where I am. You got to see where our umbrella is up here, and you've got to keep in front of us because you're going to drift down the beach if you don't. And sure enough, they get playing, and next thing you know, they're down the beach, and they have to look up. And sometimes I would just kind of watch, and what would happen is they get so far down the beach, and suddenly they realized, I need to look up. And they look up, and they can't find you. And what it would take is for me to go down the beach and say, see what I told you? Come on, let's go back here. I have to go down and get them, rescue them, bring them back to this point of reference. Spiritually speaking, that is what can happen to us in life, and that is the idea of this series. When we allow ourselves out of the rhythms of life to get disconnected from that point of reference, that solid point of reference of Christ and His Word, we may at one point find ourselves adrift, and so far adrift that really it is the Lord who is coming to get us and to bring us back into Himself. It's imperceptible at first, but before long, you're in a dangerous place. It's ultimately unsafe and unproductive. And it's our purpose as pastors of a church to call you from time to time to come back to a point of reference, or to borrow another metaphor, that of the shepherd and the sheep, to say as sheep, come back to from these distant places of feeding and come back to a place of safety and of well-being. So today we go to one of the more remote corners of Scripture for our central passage. At this point of my life, I have probably already preached or taught at some point on the vast majority of scriptural passages and stories. But this one today is a first. I have never worked on this passage before. We're going to talk about a fellow named Jonathan and another fellow named Micah. And, well, you say, I know who, Jonathan is. It's like Jonathan, he's the BFF of David, right? He's, the son of King Saul. Yeah, I know. No, different Jonathan. You say, I know Micah. Micah, that's like, Joel and Mr. Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, back 7, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, one of those guys in the minor prophets. Nope. Not that Micah either. This is a different Micah completely. We go to the book of Judges, to Judges chapters 17 and 18. Now, whenever we turn to the book of Judges, it's good to recall the history of this period in Israel's life as a nation. It is after the time that they have conquered the land under Joshua. It's before, though, the time that the kings were established with Saul, David, and Solomon in what we call the United Kingdom, and then later the divided kingdom, north and south of varied kings. The nation, of course, prior to this time of the Judges, had been blessed through the conquest of the land to enter this promised land that God had brought them out of Egypt to enter. They had finally entered into it. They had settled into it and begun to live there and establish themselves in this land. God had given them his covenant. He had given them his promises that if they lived by this prescribed covenant, that they would find blessing in what they did in their land and they would prosper in every way, though if they were to ignore it, they would fall under varied curses that the covenant had. So they had everything they needed for success. But we see in the book of Judges that it's a period of time where there is no centralized leadership of excellence in the country, and therefore the people fall into times of spiritual decline where they drift. They drift away from God into decline, and then the judge comes along, and there's a time of judgment, and there's a time of repentance and renewal, only to fall back into that same pattern over and over again. And so the leading figures through this time are the people we call judges, hence the name of the book of Judges. The summary statement, of course, of those several centuries being summarized in this sentence, that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That summarized the time, and we'll even see those words in our passage today. In the book of Judges, the first 16 chapters, we're going to be looking again at 17 and 18. The first 16 chapters are really that which gives the history of that time and of the various judges. The way we should look at the passage that we look at and begin with today in chapter 17 is to think of it as the sort of the beginning of the appendix. The appendix. It's the first of several stories that are given to kind of illustrate what life in that time of history, now having been talked about, was like. And so this story we see today is one that was early on in the time of this period of the Judges. And it's put here in the appendix as sort of illustration A of the craziness that went on and prevailed so much in so many places in Israel during this period of the Judges. Now, we're going to need to hustle through the whole story in one shot here today, as dividing it up into sections and kind of making a point and drawing some application and then going back to the story. I'm afraid I'm going to lose you in the story unless we look at the whole story kind of at once, get the whole story in our head, and then go back and hit on the varied points we'd like to pull from it in terms of application today. So, let's begin. Judges in chapter 17. Here is the story. Beginning in verse 1, Judges 17, it says, "Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, 'The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it.'" Okay, so they're in Ephraim, the hill country of Ephraim. You know where Jerusalem is, sort of in the center of Israel, south center of Israel. This is just north of Jerusalem in a hilly country known as Ephraim, one of the largest tribes of Israel. And so In fact, the northern kingdom would sometimes be called the kingdom of Ephraim because of the numbers of people and the size of the land that is being spoke of. So this is just north of Jerusalem, some miles in the hill country. There's a lady. She had 1,100 shekels of silver. This would be about 28 pounds of silver, so a pretty good sum. Not an enormous fortune, but enough money and wealth that you would be sad if it was stolen or lost or whatever. It's gone. And she knows it's been taken, and she has uttered a curse upon the person who has taken it. She has a son. His name is Micah. He comes and he says, having heard the curse and being superstitiously afraid that the curse is going to fall on him, he confesses and says, I took it. Then his mother said, the Lord bless you, my son. You're a thief, but at least you confessed. Okay, it's sort of like that, all right? So she's thankful to have it back, but now she's concerned because she has uttered this curse upon whoever would take it as well. So, verse 3, when he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son, to make an image overlaid with silver. I'll give it back to you. So she's thinking, now how can I fix this problem? I know what I'll do. And she's thinking herself how to fix this, being superstitious about this curse. She says, well, I will use the money that I've gotten back, and we'll make basically an idol out of it. And we'll consecrate it. We'll say it's holy, and that will make God okay, and we won't have anything supernatural fall upon either one of us. So that's kind of the thinking here. It's verse 4. After he returned the silver to his mother, she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, who used them to make the idol. And it was put in Micah's house. So she's making her son an idolater, right? Well, no, verse 5. Now this man Micah had a shrine. All right, he's already there with 2 feet. And he made an ephod, that's a garment type of thing for religious purposes, and some household gods, and installed one of his sons as his priest. In those days, and here kind of comes the writer looking back from later in history, talking about this period of time, giving you a little sense of, hold it, this is a crazy story already for the reader. And he basically says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. It's crazy, yes, but this is what's going on. He's got gods. He takes his own son. He makes his son a priest in his household, and he's feeling good because he's being really religious here. Verse 7, a young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah. Now, by the way, this is going to be the guy named Jonathan. This is our other main character here. We've got Micah, we got Jonathan. All right, we don't get his name Jonathan until the end of the next chapter, which is kind of long, but this is who we're talking about. We're not going to save the suspense. Now, is this Jonathan? Is this? No, we're going to tell you up front. That's who we're talking about here. The guy is a Levite, so that means he's descended from the family of the Levites, so the tribe of Levi. These were the guys who were like the religious leadership folk in Israel. Specifically, we learn later on that he is actually a grandson of Moses himself. Remember, Moses is from that tribe of Levi. Moses' brother Aaron was a high priest, and so the high priest would come from the family of Levi. The rest of the tribe of Levi served as the spiritual religious leadership in the nation. So he is from that tribe and from that background, and that is to be his life's calling. So a young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah. Interesting. You know someone else comes from Bethlehem later, right? Okay, yes, from Bethlehem. And so this is not far from Jerusalem. So he's moving to the north. Why is he doing that? He says, who had been living within the clan of Judah, remember that's where Jerusalem is, that left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. So he's on his way north, kind of sowing his oats, looking for a place to stay. Now, he's not supposed to be doing this. He's supposed to be doing his Levitical work back in the place where Levites did their Levitical work. Micah asked him, where are you from? He said, I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, he said, and I'm looking for a place to stay. And then Micah said to him, live with me and be my father, meaning like spiritual leader, and priest. And I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes, and your food. And so the Levite agreed to live with him. Hey, it's a deal, right? And the young man became like one of his sons to him. Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. And Micah said, now I know that God will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest. Levi, this Micah guy is saying, man, I have really got the religious basis covered. I've got idols, I've got an ephod, I have my sons doing priest stuff. And now this Levite comes along, I offer him a job, he's in my house, I have it going on. This is going to be great. God is going to be good to me because of all of this. All right, that's some background. Now, turn over to chapter 18. And we start to read about a tribe, another tribe in Levite, the tribe of Dan, known here as the Danites. And again, we get the writer giving us a little bit of a reminder right up front. In those days, Israel had no king. He's kind of saying, look, I know this is crazy, but remember, back in those days, it was a crazy time. Again, I'm telling you a story about how crazy it was. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So this is fairly new. When the Israelites have come out of the wilderness wanderings, they've conquered the land and so on, and they're dividing up this promised land to different tribes live in different places. And the tribe of Dan was living along the kind of the Mediterranean coast there, just west of Jerusalem over toward the coast. The Philistines were just south of them. It was a very cramped place to live. And so it says, going on, so the Danites sent 5 of their leading men from Zorah and Eshtaol, the 2 of their towns, to spy out the land and explore it. These men represented all the Danites. They told them, in other words, the tribe said to these 5 guys, go and explore the land. So it kind of harks back to the spies who went into the land earlier. These are guys trying to figure out where to go. Here, let me give you an illustration to kind of get you a sense of what's happening here. All right, Washington, D.C., Montgomery County. All right, we know that it's a very urban area. We have a lot of folks, some of you, have moved out here from Montgomery County because it's cramped, it's expensive, you're coming out here to a more expansive place to live, all right? So say, this is sort of like, to give you an illustration here, it's kind of like people living west of Jerusalem, sort of living west of Washington in Montgomery County, and saying, you know what, we need some land. We need a place to go and expand, and so what's this whole country like? How about we take 5 of you guys, go north, just go as far north as you can, up toward the Canadian border, and see what you can find up there. See if there's not a place up there for us to live. And so these 5 guys go north. And as they're going north, they're passing through Ephraim, that tribe and that area, the hill country of Ephraim, where Micah lives. So they pass him. So in our terms, it's kind of like going from Montgomery County, because it's crowded there, and heading toward Maine and passing through Allentown on the way. All right, so that's kind of what it's like. So let's go back to our story here. It says, so they entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. So they meet this Micah character. And they were near Micah's house. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So they turned in there and asked him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here? Hold it. They recognize his voice. I think what this means is, and we'll use another illustration. We'll particularly pick on him since he isn't here today. We have someone in our church who talks like this. All right. You know what I'm saying? Okay. You can tell he's from Tennessee. Okay. That's Tim Lester from Tennessee. All you got to do is hear his voice, and you know he's from Tennessee. All right, that's what they did. They heard the voice, they heard the accent. They could tell he was a Levite. He's north of where the Levites are supposed to be. What's he doing here? He's kind of like from down near where they're from. So they asked him these questions. What are you doing here? And he told them what Micah had done for him and said, he has hired me, and I am his priest. And they said to him, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. They're like, oh man, all right, a priest guy here? Who would have thought? But hey, tell us, ask God, is what we're doing heading up to Caribou, Maine, is that going to be successful? And he, you notice it doesn't say, and so he went to the Lord and no, it doesn't say that. He just responds. And back to them, the priest answered them, go in peace. Your journey has the Lord's approval. I'm sure of it. Trust me, believe me, he says. All right, so the 5 men left and came to Laish. Now, this is way up in the north. This is the Caribou Main, all right, where they saw that the people were living in safety, like the Sidonians, at peace and secure. Now, that's a bigger city to the west of that, way up northwest of Israel along the Mediterranean coast, all right? People beyond Israel, a place, a very fertile land, and so on. It says their land lacked nothing, so they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relationship with anyone else. So there's this group of people living there in this town. They're isolated pretty much from everyone. It's an incredible place to live. It's a beautiful place to live. They don't lack anything. It's fertile. It's awesome. It's a great place to live. It's the kind of place they're looking for. They don't have any political allies. They're a vulnerable people living in an awesome place. It says, verse 8, so when they returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, their fellow Danites asked them, so how'd you find things? And they answered, well, come on, let's attack them. We have seen the land, and it's very good. Aren't you going to do something? Let's not hesitate. Let's go there and take it over. When we get there, you'll find that there's an unsuspecting people. There's a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatsoever. Hey, God is with us. It's great. Let's go take it. We can have it. God will give it to us. He is on our side. And then the 600 men of the Danites, armed for battle, sent out from Zorah and Eshtaol. And on their way, they set up camp near Kiriath Jearim in Judah. And this is the place where let's skip on down here a couple verses. Go down to verse 13. It's just talking like where they came from. They're on their way. They're leaving. Okay, verse 13. But from there they went to the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. So they're passing through Allentown again, basically. And the 5 men who had spied out the land of Laish said to their fellow Danites, do you know that one of these houses has an ephod, some household gods, and an image overlaid with gold? So you know what to do. Yeah, we need some more good luck, We don't need bad luck on this trip. We need good luck. So let's go in there. Let's grab this stuff, and that's what's going to happen. So they're going to go steal this stuff from the guy. So they turned in there and went to the house of the young Levite at Micah's place and greeted him. And the 600 Danites armed for battle. So 600 soldiers standing at the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had spied out the land went inside. They took the idol, the ephod, the household gods, while the priests and the 600 men stood at the entrance of the gate. And so Jonathan is out there with the 600 guys, while the 5 men he met before stealing the stuff out of the house. And so when they came out of the house, verse 5, and took the idol, the ephod, and household goods, Jonathan the priest said to them, what are you doing? And they answered, be quiet. Don't say a word. Come with us. Be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and clan in Israel as priest rather than just one man's household? They're saying, man, we have a deal for you. You don't have to be stuck here with this one guy's household and stuff. We've already stolen the stuff. We're heading to the big time. We're headed to Maine. Our whole tribe's going to be there. You can be our priest there. Come with us. And so what does he do? He sees a good deal. And so he agrees to go with them. And so the priest was very pleased. He took the ephod, the household gods of the idol, went along with the people. And this group, putting their little children, their livestock and possessions in front of them, they turned away and left. So what they did is they put themselves between the children, the livestock, and so on that were traveling with them, recognizing that they may get pursued, and that's what happens. Verse 22, when they had gone some distance from Micah's house, the men who lived near Micah were called together and overtook the Danites. As they shouted after them, the Danites turned and said to Micah, what's the matter with you that you've called out your men to fight? And he replied, and I can just see this. This is so much seems like my New Jersey, New York background. What's the matter with you? What are you chasing us for, huh? What's the matter with you, huh? And I can just see him answering, and he replied, you took the gods I made and my priest, and you went away. What else do I have? What can you ask? And how can you ask, what's the matter with you? Hey, what's the matter with you? You can just see this going on, and back and forth here. And the Danites answered, Listen, man, don't argue with us. or some of the men here may get angry and they may attack you and your family and you lose your lives. Don't be stupid here, okay? You can just see this going on here. And so Micah kind of looks at the situation and he says to himself kind of, yeah, you got a point. There's a lot of you and you are bigger than us. All right, I lose my gods. Oh well. And he goes back home. So the Danites went their way. Micah, seeing they were too strong for him, turned around and went back home. Then the Danites, took what Micah had made and his priests, and they went on to Laish against the people at peace and secure. They attacked them with a sword and burned down their city. There was no one to rescue them because they lived in a long way from Sidon, the nearest town, which is beyond Israel's borders, and they had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Beth Rahav. And the Danites rebuilt the city, and they settled there, and they named it Dan, after their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel, to Jacob, though the city used to be called Laish. And there the Danites sent up for themselves the idol. And Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, so here you get the name, the son of Gershom, who was the son of Moses, so grandson of Moses, and Jonathan and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land, for a long time. And they continued to use the idol that Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. So where the legitimate worship was going on the whole time, here they had this illegitimate idol worship thing going on with a Levite priest and his sons serving in this capacity, drawing people away from their spiritual heritage to a false way of life and living. And so it's often spoken of in the scriptures. You'll hear the phrase, it talks about Israel. And I want to say all of Israel, they use this phrase. You'll read it a lot of times in the scriptures. All the way from Dan to Beersheba. So Dan is the northernmost city in Israel's territory. Beersheba is the southernmost. It's kind of like saying all the way from Caribou to Key West. That would be kind of a way we might talk about the extent of the whole East Coast. So, having heard the story, let's go back and quickly think about the consequences of this man, Jonathan, who has drifted from God over the years, and what happened in the life of this man, and what timeless principles we may draw from this story. I want to say 5 things today. And the first is to say this, that drift from God begins with ignorance of his word and of biblical truth. Drift begins with ignorance of God's word and of biblical truth. I mean, we see this in every component of the story, not just with Jonathan, but with all the characters in the story, who you recall are all Jewish people. They're part of Israel. They should know better. They have a common heritage. The heritage is not that old at this point to remember all the miraculous things that God had done to bring them into this land, but they've already drifted away from this. And so Micah, who already has gods built in his house, a new God put in his house from his mother. Jonathan, this priest, is away from Israel's center of worship. He incorporates the idolatry into this because he has a good business opportunity. And then the Danites and all their superstition and readiness to set up a show of religion that's devoid of truth, almost like getting a few rabbits' feet, kind of lucky charms to take with them as they make a move to inherit the land. It's like driving off into the mountains with no map and with a quarter tank of gas. But that's how so many people live life. Even Christians live life that way with no plan and no connection to God and truth. It's like spending a pile of money and going into business with no business plan whatsoever. No plan for inventory, for overhead, for marketing, just expecting it to somehow work out. And people do that, and they tend to fail when they do that. And yet people live life, the spiritual life this way. Going through life without Scripture and without a knowledge of it is like this. God has given us in His Word an owner's manual on how life works. And if you will follow the owner's manual, you can live life successfully, even in difficult times when inevitable challenges come along. It's kind of like never looking at the owner's manual of your car, which I'm going to confess in front of you, I would never do. I cannot understand cars. I have no patience with it. But I understand that the car is going to fail sometimes, and there's somebody who likes doing this, and I can take it to them, okay? But it's kind of like having a car, buying a car, driving it around, just filling it up with gas, and expecting it to always work without ever changing oil, without ever doing maintenance kinds of things that are necessary for success of a long life of an automobile. And then when you don't do any of that, getting angry at GM or Ford or whatever, Chrysler, because they made a lousy product that failed you. But that's how people do the Christian life. They enter into it with some kind of idea that they have some kind of connection with God, and they start to live, and they expect God to do everything for them just right and to work things out. And when He doesn't, it's like it's the manufacturer's error or something here, instead of their own lack of diligence in a program of maintenance along the way of keeping connected, that you don't drift from God. Drift from God begins with ignorance of His word and of biblical truth. We see it throughout this story. Second thing to say, drift from God is accelerated by the allure of worldly gain. Jonathan from the tribe of Levi, we've already talked what his responsibilities were, where they lie in terms of serving the nation with his Levitical heritage. It certainly did not include running around the country looking for a deal, for a place to live, and setting himself up and offering himself as sort of a religious free agent to whoever would pay the best price. That's not God's plan for his life, but that's the allure that the world held for Jonathan. And we know that this is the seduction that the world has for all of us, of course, that accumulating the securities and the joys that it offers will somehow bring us satisfaction and security. And it's difficult to ever get fully away from some sense or idea that there's stuff in this world that's going to give us happiness and security. The third thing to say is adrift from God is sedated and it's suppressed by merely outward religious symbols and rituals. We see it in the mother, her superstitions. We see it in Micah. He's sure God's going to bless him because he has his own personal shrine. The Danites believe the idols are going to help them, even though the ridiculous part of the story is that these lousy idols didn't protect the first owner from them coming and taking them. Why should they help them in the future? It's crazy, but that's the way drift from God is. Because it's religious and it's seen, does not mean that it is accurate and true and real. There's a lot of religious stuff and show and observance that does not have reality attached to it. So much of theological liberalism. They don't believe the God Bible. They don't believe Jesus is divine. They don't believe in any sort of objective truth, a need for personal salvation from the debt of sin. They just sort of believe in some kind of big, grand ideas about love and kindness and goodness. And there's all sorts of religious show, and they promote the big idea, but there's no substance to it at all. Again, drift is sedated and suppressed by merely outward religious symbols and rituals. And even evangelical Christians can get into this religious duty sort of thing, sort of a spiritual version of community service hours. And I know, like you guys in the public school, you got this community service project stuff you got to do. You got a certain number of hours you got to do. You got to get out there. You got to do it. You got to get it over with so that you can go on successfully in life. A lot of people, and maybe some of you are here today like that. That's what going to church is like for you. That's what being a part of religious stuff, whatever. It's just something you got to do a certain amount of it. You got to accumulate a little bit. You got to get it going. It kind of keeps God sort of happy up there and so on. Just because it's outwardly religious, it has symbols, it has rituals attached to it, like meeting at 9:30 on a Sunday morning, it doesn't mean that it is true or connected to the truth or real or something that is viable for you. A fourth thing to say is that drift from God may also be sedated and suppressed by apparent signs of success. Who else in Ephraim had their own personal priest? Obviously, this guy had to be blessed. And with the Danites as well. Hey, for the Danites up there in Caribou, I mean, it's a long way down to Washington, to the center of worship or whatever. Did I just say that in one sentence? You get the point. All right, it's a long way. Let's set up our own thing here, you know? Let's get our own deal going here. And just because it's successful and it's big, it doesn't mean it's connected to truth and reality. In the material world, we may see people have a lot of stuff, and we may presume they're blessed by God, or maybe we even presume that they've gotten it in some illegitimate way, though people with stuff, they're successful for a reason, right? God must bless them. We tend to fall into that. Or in the religious world, we're really into symbols of religious success, most often measured in 2016 America by the numbers of people at a place, by the physical structures of that place, by the offerings that that place generates, and the mass of the ministry that is produced. And some of the health and wealth types we see on TV with large followings, you can see that some of that often is rather bizarre. But I've been amazed over the years of how simple people in simple places like Hagerstown, Maryland, drift from church to church and flit around without ever even thinking and considering what are the theological points of foundation under these ministries, and what do I need to be connected to? And we should look for long-term patterns of faithfulness to Scripture and consistency in that regard, and growth of lives connected to that. Even those people's lives and the ups and downs of life, walking and growing together through the good and the bad of life. And a final thing to say is that drift from God may have the long-term result of generational consequences. The final verses in our story: for generations, there was this alternative worship of idols that took place that rivaled the truth of what God was seeking to do in the people in the center of worship, which in the northern kingdom was at Shiloh. Religious indifference. If you have religious indifference, a lack of value for the things of God due to having drifted away from God, I can tell you from years of observation of people in church life that your children will see that it is really not truly a value to you. And whatever percentage of value it was for you, if it's only 20% of what it should be, I guarantee they will nowhere get near 20%. They will be at 5 or 10%, and the next generation will be down to 0, and it won't even matter to them at all. If you're drifting, you can be sure that that drift will be felt almost surely through the generations. It will be noted. Here's a big idea for you to summarize all of this. When you've drifted away from God and you pursue elusive, material, worldly gains on your own, you'll never really be satisfied because you're chasing something that does not really, truly exist permanently. And frankly, that is what the majority of people in the world are doing, seeking happiness in things that are temporary things of this world. And even in the Christian realm, people are so often seeking something that is not the legitimate, true stuff of connectedness with God that represents ultimate, eternal security. I don't like getting older, and it happens fast. And my wife tells me I talk too much to you about my experiences of getting older. So let me balance that out by saying that I do see myself, even though I'm older than most of you now probably, as an absolute stud muffin of fitness and health, okay? All right. If you think I'm too old, okay, and you're younger than me, let us go on a 75-mile bicycle race and we'll see who wins and who's old and who is young. So I've said that, so I balanced it out. But I've noticed getting older that there are things that you see in life that I don't like. And Facebook gives you these reminders. Like I got one this week. It was from 6 years ago. It threw up a picture of my granddaughter Bella from 6 years ago when she was a year old. It's the first time I think as a grandfather I admitted I'm a grandfather, and this is what grandfathers do. They put pictures of their grandkids there, and then people started to comment. Now, looking at this 6 years later, I looked at it and I thought, I don't just have one. I got 8 grandchildren now, and I'm on my way to beating Arnold and Julie Hurst in grandchildren. That's one of my goals of life. And of course, I may get there because Julie, this last week, dropped one of her own grandchildren when another one showed up. More on that story in a moment. But so that's a good thing, but yet at the same time, you're like, man, you're getting older and the stuff's coming up. And what was really sad to me were comments that were there. They were nice comments, but the majority of the comments were from people I don't have a relationship with anymore. They've kind of just moved on from relationship. And just, it was a loss there. And I felt sad about that. And what was really sad is the one comment that was there was from a friend of mine that I grew up with. He's a pastor. He was here one Sunday some years ago. Remember the guy who was real big and had the radio voice? Okay, he was here one Sunday. And he was teasing me. We graduated from high school together, and he was teasing me that at that point he didn't have any grandchildren, and how he's so much, I'm so much older than him. Yeah, 6 months. And he was saying, and he went on his comments, and he talked about, he said, but I have a son. I said, my son's getting married. He's a pastor down in New Mexico, and we're real excited about that, and so we're on the way too. Well, what's happened in the intervening years, and this is the sadness, is that son was killed in a head-on crash. They got married, had a baby, and the son was killed in a head-on crash with a drunk driver, as was my friend's father, the pastor I grew up under 2 generations back. So, and I looked at all of this, and I had this moment this week where it was kind of, Randy, here's the point. At the end of the day, what you got to hold on to is God. That's what you've got to hold on, God and His Word. The rest of it is passing away. And you want to count and you measure and you hang on to the things of this world, and that it's all just passing away. All you got to hang on to is God. Is there anything more illustrative of the pursuit of the temporary than this game that's out there now called Pokemon Go? All right? We don't want to be grouchy old men about the whole thing, and about young people and their phones, but could there be a better spiritual metaphor anywhere about this generation? And I heard a story of a person who had a coworker who was playing Pokemon Go at the office. An older employee observing these antics couldn't comprehend exactly what was going on. And so trying to explain the app prompted the following questions from the guy. What are you looking at again? What are you looking for again? Where are they? You mean they're not real? You mean you can't see them? There really is something funny about a generation of smartphone users spending time and energy chasing things that aren't real. But that's what's being consummately driven to attain. That's what's like being consummately driven to attain material happiness in this world. It's like chasing an illusion. If I can just get one more, if I can just get one more dollar, one more gadget, just one more of this anything, I'll be secure, I'll be happy, I'll be at peace. And ultimately, it's like the story that Jesus told. He was good at telling stories. He said about a man who said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Who then will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. At the end of it all, what you have that you keep and you hold is what that you have in relationship with God. That is the stuff that eternal. The rest of it is passing away. And when we drift from God, we drift into putting our hope and our confidence in stuff that passes away. So don't drift from God. Father, help us to be people who do keep our eyes fixed on you. Thank you for that firm foundation that we have in you and in the truth, the book you have given us in the Scriptures. May we be people of it day in and day out, fixated on you and on that truth, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.